We have come to the end of the questioning of Ron Gilbertson, a detective sergeant in the Special Demonstration Squad. It was a big contrast to the first half of his questioning, where he almost seemed candid and rarely said that he couldn't remember. In the second half, there was a great deal of, well, this was 20 years ago, I simply can't remember. He was questioned quite extensively about his handling of Robert Hastings and the reporting that was given in about the International Solidarity Movement, Chowdhury, and both this connection between the ISM and two suicide bombers, as well as the fake bomb vest plot that was supposedly MT had carried out, reported on by HM118, cover name Simon Wellings. I really feel that this afternoon really filled in a lot of the blanks about the obsession with Islamic extremism that we saw SDS officers doing during that time period, and the background of Ron Gilbertson's involvement in E-Squad and what he referred to as a passion for dealing with Islamic extremism and the Palestinian issue. I'm joined by the members of the Undercover Research Group. What did you make of all that?
You go first.
It was quite difficult. Ironically, in the first half, of all the witnesses, he was starting to come across as the most human.
Yeah.
Almost. I'm not saying he was likable, but it was like, oh, okay, maybe we're actually getting on who's been candid about life in the unit, fulfilled, and then, as you said, he just blew the whole thing up. As soon as the questions started getting a little bit more difficult, a little bit more thing. So his background is originally in pre-2000 millennial Christian extreme groups, and from there he seemed to into extreme Muslim groups. I was sort of quite different, quite the most same.
I think he saw some career advancement after 9/11.
So yeah, that was, and he believes that he can, bring this to the SDS as well, and that yes, and it is interesting that this is the first time since 1972 that they really start targeting the Palestinians, support groups, international solidarity movements, in particular, but many groups are doing it, and he's clearly pushing an agenda around this.
Yeah, very clearly, and I think you got the impression that he had said to his to the undercover officers he was managing, it was like, bring me stuff about Islamic extremism, and as we've come to know from the SDS. If they like given a hint of being like they'll be rewarded for doing reporting on certain things, they'll find it. And it was very notable that he submitted a good work report for Simon Wellings' report, the fake bomb plot, fake bomb vest plot stunt, to embarrass Ariel Sharon. I mean, it was at the end of the day, it was one phoned-in report. And he puts him in for a good work accommodation for that.
But also, we should maybe explain to the viewers or remind the viewers that, the report is called in a bit. It doesn't immediately file it. He waits till he comes in the next morning. Suspicion that Wellings is probably drinking, is this drinking. Files report, and over the next while, the report becomes more and more exaggerated, more and more wild. And therefore, of course, he should get accommodation. This is incredible stuff. Except it's one phone call, a drunken night in the club.
Yeah,
and it gets referenced in the annual reports. This is a justification for the SDS going forward as to how they stop this major threat against Ariel Sharon.
I mean, that's really telling. We were shown a report from 2007, which is after Ron Gilbertson left the unit, but Ron Gilbertson rather. But it's at a time when there's, the people moving to close down the SDS, and they're really like blowing their own trumpet about things they've achieved, and we get like an entirely fantasized, over the top, full of extra colourful details about this incident. And what's also interesting is there's a lot of breadcrumbing about the information that he does have. So the fact that the activist has been talked out of doing it is left off the initial reports, but it appears in later.
Explain to people what actually.
Yeah. So if you weren't following the evidence about Robert Hastings back in February. This was a report that Simon Wellings, I do apologise. Simon Wellings back in February. This was a report that he filed when he was infiltrating the globalised resistance about a time in a pub where someone who, Guy Taylor says was one person, everybody says it was one person, but he reports it as another. Notably, the other person was the only person of colour in the group. That had come up with an idea to embarrass Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister of Israel, on his visit to the UK by dressing up as a suicide bomber and rushing towards his car when he comes to visit the Downing Street. This incident, according to Guy Taylor, who was there, was actually proposed by another person, a white person, who, to be charitable, maybe was prone to fantastical ideas, and that he was quickly talked out of it in the pub, and it was sort of almost forgotten by Guy Taylor as like just one random pub chat incident.
And backed up by Noel Douglas. There's not just one witness, there's two people have given evidence about this.
And also remember that there was a lot of speculation about the so-called suicide fest, which we think has never existed. But there was back in the day already loads of speculation about what it looked like and who made it and where it was and where it had gone to. And that was that continued today. That he was like very specific about what the suicide fest looked like, although it was completely different from the speculation that we heard before. And also he kind of threw in his experience with ESCO. I know what suicide fests look like, even though they look different this time.
Yeah, so I think his whole description was around a particular type of webbing, military thing. There was nothing attached to it to indicate thing, but apparently this is characteristic worn by wannabe suicide bombers, as if it's like a sign that, hey, if I wear military webbing on my clothes, I must be wanting to become a suicide bomber. That seemed to be the implication of what he was saying.
We saw in his written statement to the inquiry that, he included the fact that when he was in East Squad, he did a risk assessment about a Palestine Solidarity campaign protest where he said someone was wearing this webbing top that was reminiscent of a suicide vest tunic, and that they were speaking in a language he didn't understand. He admitted that he had an obsession with Islamic extremism with a specific focus on suicide bombing. And this seems to come up again and again in his reports. He was looking for it everywhere, and he kept finding it in like some quite ridiculous situations. There's others we'll come on to, but is there more you want to say about this fake suicide vest plot?
No, I just wanted to make a step towards the olive oil import.
Oh,
business
the ISM,
yeah.
Also, there was he handled Robert Hastings, who he clearly seemed to have directed to find reports about Islamic extremism, and directed him to infiltrate the ISM, the International Solidarity Movement, with particular focus on Atif Chowdhury. Those people who were following the evidence of with the questioning of Robert Hastings several months ago will remember that, and also the appearance by Atif Chowdhury himself at the inquiry giving evidence, will remember all of that. But specifically, he goes to great lengths to draw a connection between two British nationals who went to Palestine and ended up being involved in a suicide attack in Tel Aviv. Apparently they went to the ISM offices when they were in Palestine before to visit the death site of Rachel Corrie and be part of a vigil there. They had a cup of tea. This was all reported quite extensively at the time. We were shown a BBC News article about it, and it was clear that MI5 and MI6 had looked at the situation. 2 years later, when this is all known about, Robert Hastings files an SDS report about it, saying that the two members of the ISM, clearly not true. Even today, Ron Gilbertson goes, well, we don't know if it's not true. There may be intelligence out there that I don't know about, that you don't know about, that actually shows the ISM were involved in suicide bombings. Absolutely insane. The man is clearly an obsessive about Muslims and the potentiality that Palestinian solidarity it will lead to suicide bombing attacks. Quite wild.
It was indeed. The main suspect in this was mainly importing olive oil and dates from Palestine.
Yeah, so
and he went like, I don't know about that company. We don't know about that company. It might be something else behind that company. And it's like he was implicating all kinds of things that weren't true just to connect dots that couldn't be connected at all, which tells you quite a lot about how the STS collects intelligence and makes up reports.
I mean, it was very so. So Atif Chowdhury was someone who, at the very early days, was involved in the international solidarity movement. He actually withdrew from the international solidarity movement fairly early on, but at the time when Robert Hastings infiltrated, he was the only person of color in the group. He was a person of a Muslim background with a Muslim-sounding name. So he was the person who then Robert Hastings was tasked really to be alongside for the longest period of time. He made it very clear there was no sign of any involvement in Islamic extremism of any sort, or even Islam itself in any sort. Yet today, Ron Gilbertson could not accept that. He was talking about these things as if they were still live. Zatoun has been around for a very long period of time. It may be that you buy their olive oil, you might buy their dates. They're available in every Oxfam in the country. He still questioned the validity of that company today. That's how much of a fantasist he is. It really showed, during the first half, we got the impression of somebody who was being a little bit more honest than most we've come across. What we're left with is the impression of a total fantasist who is obsessed with Muslims. It was a hill he was willing to die on, that there was something still dodgy about Atif Chowdhury.
Yeah.
And one of the reports that they were showing was, Rob Hastings took Atif Chowdhury to the airport so he can go visit his brother who is working in the British Embassy in Libya. And it's like, you left out in the report it was a holiday and that his brother was doing. It's like Atif Chowdhury is going to Libya. Dun, dun, dun. And it's like, it's not just about what they put into the reports, it's what they deliver the omissions. It's all about creating the image. And it's like, and we don't know how much grief the family would have got behind the scenes because of that, how much extra scrutiny. They're clearly putting in inflammatory reports. And it was interesting, the barrister counsel inquiry actually said the title of this section is Accuracy Reports. But one of the big questions, we don't know where these reports are going, what damage they're doing. This is a modern form of blacklisting. Well, we're going to thank you in some way. You're going to get Schedule 7 or stopped or put under more intrusive surveillance. We don't know if the family end up having their phones tapped as a result of this. But these are all important civil liberty consequences. And
it was very, when Atif Chowdhury appeared himself, he did point out that because his brother was working for the British government at the British Embassy in Libya, obviously he had some very high security, had a very high level of vetting. The idea that there would be anything dodgy about him, we saw reports that reported on every member of Atif Chowdhury's family, their jobs, who they were connected with. The fact that they'd gone over there for his nephew's birthday, none of this detail was included in the report.
So, constantly we are being told that the SES has to do this intrusive reporting in order to essentially clear people. Well, it's important intelligence because it shows they're not. This reporting is the complete opposite. This is setting people up and smearing them, and has consequences. Like, he should feel really ashamed of what he did. I just wanted to final thing. He went on about how he's not racist. He would recognize racism, but he did refer to people of color as colored. It's one of those little betrayals. He's got the right words, but then he slips it out. He was he kept bringing up, actually, when it was about racism, whether it was about sexism. He claimed there was never any of that in the uniformed police in the 1970s. He was defending the police in the 1970s as not being racist. But he said it was different times, different values. The values of today you might consider some of the things that were happening back then as sexist or racist or Islamophobic, but I can show you at the time they weren't. The time he was talking about when he was saying that was 2004. Now, when this inquiry started, we had officers from the Special Demonstration Squad talking about the late 1960s and said there were different views back then. I think that was blown out of the water by Diane Langford, who pointed to the work of people like James Baldwin at the time who were talking about racism in terms that we would understand today, saying that, no, this was not the case, that those views were always racist. I didn't think we would be here looking at the events of the early 2000s and you would have Special Demonstration Squad officers going, oh, it was a different time. Oh, our ideas about race and sexism were completely different then.
it's a nonsense, an utter nonsense.
Post McPherson, something we heard a lot about is McPherson, institutional racism. They're all, he even said, oh yeah, we went on the racial incident awareness training. This morning said the same. Did you learn anything?
Apparently not.
Yeah, I mean, there was such a difference. I mean, when we had the first half of his reporting, when he was talking about handling officers, there was a lot of questions about the sexual abuse undercover. He was very clear. He remembered so many details. As soon as we got onto his reporting around things that he thought was Islamic extremism or terrorism, he was like, couldn't remember, had so many reports. I wrote so many reports. I signed off so many reports. He was showing reports with his name on. Did you write this? Oh, I don't remember writing it. Maybe I just signed it. Well, were you in the habit of signing things that you've never even read? I mean, it was such a chalk and cheese it's chalk and cheese giving of evidence.
Yeah.
The impression he gave in the first half was so different. I mean, I can't believe, like, when we did the video after the first half of his evidence, I was like, oh, this is kind of fair play,
No.
But Jesus Christ.
Always wait until the end. The devil will come out.
I mean, just in terms of some of the other things that he talked about, we were shown some of the other reports where like there was a lot of talking about these suicide bombers and the terminology used. He said, well, I didn't write that because I would have referred to it as Shaheed, which, like, as if, I don't know, this idea that he had to, like, kind of impress that he had this extra knowledge. And I really think we saw a lot of that bullshitty I know better than you about Muslim extremism stuff that we got from Robert Hastings that appears on the Urban 75 forums. You kind of see the where it comes from. I really think that, like, it filled out this thing about Hastings' deployment and, like, the way that he talked back then.
And this is worth reminding people that that Hastings posted a lot about Islam and the Quran, and at the time it was not, other than post 9/11, it wasn't necessarily that understandable. Now that we see that his main cover officer has shared interests, which also begs the question then is just how close were they? Because if you believe Gilbertson, it's like, knew him. We weren't particularly good friends. It was just we had a professional work relationship. Kind of feels a little bit more than that by the end.
It's also interesting that when Robert Hastings had to move, put in a thing that he wanted to move because his family were receiving racism, that the report that Gilbertson signed off on, that he claims he doesn't remember writing, but it clearly, I think, almost obviously is written by him, claims that the racism was a result of the aftermath of the 7/7 bombings. Now, when Robert Hastings gave evidence, he said, that's nonsense. It was nothing to do with that. It was everything to do with racism and the fact that he worked as a police officer. 7/7 didn't come into it. I don't know why that's been put in there. Once you hear who Ron Gilbertson is, of course he put 7/7 in there. He was obsessed with anything about that. It was just the way that he crowbarred in any opportunity something about Islamic terrorism. Just a quick note, a lot of people who were affected by the deployment of undercover officers have followed very closely the hearings by those undercover officers, coming to the hearings or just following from afar. I think maybe they don't really realize how significant these managers are. I think those people who were affected by the deployment of Simon Wellings or Robert Hastings would have found a lot of interest in today's hearing. I really recommend, if you are one of those people, please go back and watch the video of this afternoon. I think it fills in a lot of the gaps, and I think that will continue to be the case with all the undercover officers. The people that they managed were the ones everybody remembers because they were actually in the field. But those men were right there. They were right there. They were just in the background, like setting the agenda, setting the tasking, processing the information, and working out like what was of interest and what wasn't of interest. So please do pay attention to that. I think it's very significant. I note that there's 62 people watching and only 3 people have liked. Makes a huge difference to how far we're able to get this message out if people would share, like, subscribe, all that to these videos. I feel there's lots of other things we've missed. There were so many things that I was like, oh my God, I need to say that I probably missed plenty of other stuff that was covered in the question.
And what was not covered this afternoon was Hastings' very coercive relationship with the neighbor of Atish Chaudhry, like the woman who lived next door to that sort of was available, or he got to know her, and he kind of mistreated her in a very bad way. And apart from general question about sexual relationships, I don't know. I don't think he's been asked about that.
No, I mean, he was asked, was there any change in the account, because it was the relationship actually started just as Gilbertson was leaving the unit. Gilbertson says that he didn't notice a change in character of Robert Hastings when his marriage was supposedly breaking down, when the flirtations period begun. The one thing he did say was that he told Robert Hastings that if he engaged in sexual activity undercover, it would be considered rape, which, as we said in the last video, is unique for an undercover officer to say that. Now, I mean, as you say, the first time I've got that recorded is in the Operation Hearn interviews, which are many years later. Well, 5 years later. So it's not a huge time. So it is in hindsight, but it's still unique.
Yeah. But I think it was a lot, because it got very rushed at the end, like
very.
And unfortunately, Mitting had to go off for family reasons, which is understandable. But it meant that a lot of stuff didn't get put to him. I was like, I know that we lot of us have put in Rule 10 questions for a whole bunch of other issues. And there's the whole issue. He's there just as the pressure really starts ramping up on the unit, that there is this need for us to justify. He's there for when the merger happens. So there's a lot of other questions. With this morning, fine. It was a bit rushed at the end, but we survived half a day. We really needed a full day with this person.
Yes, we definitely needed more time with him. He was getting more and more irritated. He got quite angry. He started interjecting during the questions, adding extra words. He clearly was he'd gone from someone who was quite calm at the beginning, quite quick to answer, to getting frustrated by the line of the questioning. I think that would have only continued had he had to answer Rule 10 questions now. They will be submitted in writing if they're considered of interest enough. I mean, we look out for those. God knows when we'll ever see them. I mean, this is the problem with the inquiry. When things are just on paper, sometimes it's months and months before we actually see them.
And you also need follow-up. You say, okay, you've given them off the answer. Okay. And some of the questions today were like, you said this word salad. Can you now explain the words in the salad so we know what it actually means? But this is why the questioning is so important. And it's disappointing that we didn't get to some of those really big topics.
Yeah, there was a great deal extra to be covered. I think it's a problem generally with the inquiry that they don't allow for that enough. I mean, I think the situation as it currently is, which wasn't done today, still isn't good enough, quite frankly. We will. This is the end of the week. There's no hearing tomorrow. We will return on Monday. Next, we've got 3 days of Detective Chief Inspector Michael Dell. Dell was the DCI at the time when Ron Gilbertson was there. He was the person who recruited Ron Gilbertson. He is the DCI who gives the direct directive, as it kept getting referred to, that undercover officers must not engage in sexual activity undercover, to end it now. And if he finds out about it, then people will be taken off the unit. Supposedly that led to it being talked about basically for the first time, if you'd believe the undercover officers, which I don't recommend you do.
And they didn't stop doing it, so.
No, quite. So there's 3 days of Dell. We can only hope that the way that he answers questions is an improvement on former previous officers. Then on Thursday, we'll be hearing from Stephen Beals, who was another detective sergeant who served alongside. He was the handler of Carlo Soracchi. Went to Italy with him. I'm trying to remember who else he was handler for, kind of off the top of my head. But certainly a very significant officer. I think all 4 days will be well worth your time. Please tune in if you're not able to attend. You are this. I would say the public gallery is literally the three of us and Helen Steele, and as somebody from the squatters, the association, the advisory service for squatters. So that's kind of it in terms of attendees in the public gallery. There is plenty of space. If you'd like to come along, the AC is world class. Everybody's suffering from a heat wave. We're not. We're quite cool,
We're actually quite cold today.
Yeah. I mean, he's wearing a jumper, wearing an actual jumper. So yeah, I mean, I'd recommend coming along if you are able to. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think that Dell is going to be a very big name. There's lots of changes going on. There's a lot happening. But also Stephen Beals. There's a amount of playing sergeants. Stephen Beals is one of the key sergeants in this, and there's so much corruption under his management. So he's probably going to deny it all. Got to expect that, but the questions are going to be interesting.
I think it's worth noting that I think all of us were like, oh, it's the undercover officers of interest, and then the senior management of interest. But it's the detective sergeants who have actually, for whatever reason, have shown an extra dimension. We're getting an extra understanding from them that I wasn't expecting.
I think it's because they're the interface. So they're much more of the lads. They're much more playing that sort of. He's very clear it's not a boys' club, but he brought that phrase up himself today. And very clear that look at yourself, mate. And so they're having more of that day-to-day interface. They're taking the daily calls and the more social things. So, and they're taking all the reports. So if anybody's in a position to really build up a pattern of life of the undercovers themselves, use their own terminology, it's these sergeants.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we'll see you all next week. If you've got any questions or anything you'd like to know about the coverage we're doing, please get in touch. We're trying to do our best to cover it. I know that there's some people who've got a particular interest in certain topics and feel that we don't cover them enough. I think that this afternoon's hearing is one of those areas. I assure you we are paying as much attention as we possibly can. Of course, we're not necessarily the only people who can do this. Anybody can do the coverage that we're doing if they wanted to come along and put the time in. So you're more than welcome to get involved if you'd like to. But thanks for joining us. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff.